Jennifer Harris disappeared from Bonham, Texas on Mother's Day 2002. The secrets in the Jennifer Harris case have been hidden for 20 years.
When someone disappears, you have to look at who would benefit from their disappearance.
What happened to Jennifer Harris? And who is responsible for her death? Coming May 10th, Final Days on Earth, Season 2, The Life and Death of Jennifer Harris. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 266 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
I'm doing okay, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm down on my back, so can make it a little rough.
It makes it a lot of rough sometimes.
A lot of rough?
A lot of rough.
Okay. I like the way that you went with that.
Yeah.
Hey, let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout outs. We had Andreas Mutsatzos.
Hey, Andreas.
And I think I've said that name 14 different ways.
You have.
Between Patreon, TCAT, and Unsolved. We had Gabby Lennox.
Hey, Gabby.
Cody.
Hey, Cody.
Raven.
What's going on, Raven?
Christina Noonan.
Hey, Christina.
Ashley Whitaker.
What's going on, Ashley?
Rebecca Israel.
Hey, appreciate that, Israel.
Dana Venturi bumped up to our highest level.
Hey, Venturi.
Amy Warman.
Hey, appreciate that, Warman.
Mary Noriega.
Hey, Mary.
LJ Hughes.
What's going on, Hughes?
Noir Bastest.
Well, the pastis.
Megan Hughes.
Hey, Megan.
Susan Thompson.
What's up, Thompson?
Nikki McLagan.
Hey, Nikki.
And Katie Fielding.
Well, appreciate that, Katie.
And then if we go back into the vault, Gibbs, this week we selected Kay Sharp.
Hey, Kay.
So we appreciate all that. We had some great PayPal donations from Susan Pierce.
Hey, Susan.
Lauren Porter.
Appreciate that, Lauren.
And Robin Taylor.
Thanks, Robin.
Gibbs, right now on True Crime All the Time, we have an episode out on Clarence Ray Allen. This is kind of a strange one. This was a guy who kind of had it all going on. A successful business, wife, kids, grandkids, but decided that he wanted to kind of start a criminal enterprise.
He wanted more.
He wanted more. He was greedy, and he was murderous.
Yes.
At the same time. All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm ready.
We are talking about what has become known as the Hall Mills murders. On September 16th, 1922, 41-year-old Reverend Edward Hall and 31-year-old Eleanor Mills were found dead beneath a crabapple tree in Franklin Township, New Jersey. Both Edward and Eleanor were married to other people. Despite multiple arrests and a sensational murder trial, no one has ever been convicted of the Hall Mills murders. So obviously we're going back a ways. This murder happened almost 100 years ago.
I mean, they had murders back then?
Murder has been around for as long as man has been around.
That is very true.
You know, one caveman clubbed another caveman over the head because he wanted to take whatever he had.
Yeah.
Boom.
Just
Murder.
like that.
Edward Wheeler Hall was born on June 12, 1881 in Brooklyn. He earned a degree in liberal arts from the Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute and attended the General Theological Seminary in Manhattan. He served as a reverend in New York and Basking Ridge, New Jersey, before moving to New Brunswick in 1909. Edward preached at the St. John the Evangelist Episcopal Church in New Brunswick, New Jersey. He began courting Frances Noel Stevens, and they married in 1911. Frances was 7 years older, born on January 13th, 1874. Frances Stevens came from the extremely wealthy Carpenter family on her maternal side and she was related to the owners of Johnson & Johnson.
So there's some money there.
There's a lot of money there. She lived in a mansion in New Brunswick. Now, it's been speculated that Edward married Frances for her family's wealth and status. Edward moved into the mansion with Frances and her brother Willie. It's also been said that Edward managed Willie's allowance. Now, it wouldn't be the first time or the last time that somebody married for money.
Right.
That has happened a lot throughout the years. Eleanor Reinhardt Mills was born in November 1888. She married James Mills when she was just 15 years old. They had 2 children together. James and Eleanor lived in a rundown house in New Brunswick. James was a shoemaker and the church sexton at St. John the Evangelist. Eleanor sang in the choir. The Daily News called her the glamour girl of the choir. It was reported that Eleanor liked to turn to church, but also romance novels to escape everyday life. Gibbs, she went to church almost every day.
Wow. I know you also like to turn to romance novels to escape everyday life.
I do. I also get a kick out of it when, I pick up that romance novel and see you on the cover.
Oh, one of my Fabio hair?
With the flowing hair, you're riding the white steed. It makes me laugh.
Leave it right there.
Just one of your many side gigs.
Exactly. Romance novel cover model.
Now, in the reporting, it seems as though no one really knows when Eleanor and Edward started seeing each other, but he began calling on the Mills every day by the end of 1919. It was said that their affair was kind of an open secret around town. On September 14th, 1922, Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills went out for a walk at Phillips Farm between New Brunswick and Somerville, New Jersey. On September 16th, 2 teens, Pearl Balmer and Raymond Schneider, were out gathering mushrooms and found their bodies. Edward and Eleanor were found lying side by side beneath a crabapple tree. Edward's hand was underneath Eleanor's neck, and her hand was placed on his knee. Torn up love letters were lying between them, and Edward's business card lay at his feet.
Just trying to get a visual of that.
It's kind of a strange description of 2 bodies. It's almost as if they're in a romantic, intimate pose.
Right.
But Edward Hall was killed by a single bullet, which was found still in his forehead. Eleanor had been shot 3 times in the head and slashed across the throat. She also had a 3-inch black bruise extending around her neck. Police thought this was done with the scarf that she was wearing, which was found next to the bodies. They had been dead for at least 2 days. Investigators estimated that they died at 10 p.m. on the 14th. So I think when you go through the details of how they were killed, it makes it even more strange, the description of how their bodies were found.
Yeah.
I mean, these were individuals who were shot in the head. Eleanor multiple times. Her throat was slashed. But yet, again, it's almost as if they were posed. Because how could their bodies just naturally kind of end up in those positions after such violent deaths? You wouldn't think that would be possible.
Right. Somebody absolutely had to pose them in that particular fashion.
The police found powder burns on Eleanor's face, but not on Edward's. So to them, that meant he obviously was not shot at the same close range that Eleanor was, meaning he was probably trying to escape. Eleanor had deep nail scratches on her face and arms, which the police thought indicated that a woman was present at the scene of the murder. It seemed as though she had been in a fight, but the grounds didn't show any signs of a disturbance. The police found 3 revolver shells, one under a body, one that fell out of Edward's clothes while he was being prepped for burial, and another in the grass. People who lived near the farm told detectives that they heard two women talking, gunshots, and then a woman screaming. One witness said she was certain she heard two female voices before the shooting. So there's a lot to break down here. I think the nail scratches on Eleanor indicated to police, okay, those most likely came from a woman.
Right.
Now you have witnesses saying they heard two women talking,
Right.
gunshots, and then a woman screaming. But I also want to talk about the shells found at the scene. You know, one thing that we don't often talk about is the difference between a revolver and, let's say, a semi-automatic pistol. You know, when you shoot a revolver, unlike a semi-automatic pistol, the shells don't come flying out. The bullet comes out, but the shell or the casing stays inside the revolver.
Right.
You see in the Westerns where, you know, they have to flip it open, they have to dump the empty shells out. Whereas a semi-automatic pistol ejects the shells as the shot is fired. So if this was really a revolver, as police said it was, to me, it's even more curious that shells were found at all.
Right. Why would somebody dump the shells out?
Unless they did it on purpose. And if so, what was the meaning? What was the purpose? The bodies were found near the border in Franklin Township, Somerset County. Middlesex and Somerset investigators worked the case. Reporters and residents swarmed the scene just a few minutes after the police arrived. Sightseers stripped the tree of most of its leaves and bark. It was said that they were doing this so that they could get souvenirs.
So strange to think that this is what they did back then. This was like a novelty item, right? I've got to have a piece of bark of that crab tree because that's where these murders took place.
Yeah, it seems strange, I think, for us today to think about it.
Yeah.
Now, sadly, I think we are much more accustomed to murder, if that's the right word.
Right.
We see it on television. We hear about it on the radio. It's a little bit more ubiquitous. This was probably a very huge deal to neighbors, to people around, you know, that area. But what happened was you had all these sightseers coming out and they ended up contaminating the crime scene by walking around. They even picked up and passed around Reverend Hall's calling card, which was propped up against the left heel of his shoe. One person discovered a handkerchief with powder marks, bullet holes, and blood stains. Two officers arrived at the scene. One guarded the bodies, but it was said that he had to look away from the wound in Eleanor's neck because it was filled with maggots.
Yeah, it's a little stomach turning.
It is. I mean, obviously these bodies had been out there for a couple of days. And so some, you know, nasty things are going to happen. Time magazine reported that souvenir hunters even later stole the crabapple tree altogether. Just cut it down.
I don't get it. I don't get that. You know, like, hey, what's that in your living room there? Well, that's the old crab tree from the murder site.
That's the murder tree. Reporters found and published some of Edward and Eleanor's love letters, which, you know, for that time, Gibbs, were very scandalous.
Of course.
As quoted from the Times-Union, one letter said, "Oh, honey, I am fiery today. Burning, flaming love. It seems ages since I saw my babykin's body and kissed every bit of you." Okay, that might be scandalous.
Yeah.
By 1922 standards. I think that's pretty tame in the world of 2022.
I think I saw a similar letter up on your kitchen island from either you to your wife or your wife to you. I don't know.
Yeah. We use the word babykins.
Yeah.
Another letter said, "You are a true priest. You see in me only your physical inspiration. You, a priest, was pan-religious. God meant people to enjoy all things deeply." These letters revealed that Eleanor and Edward were deeply in love. As stated in this letter, "There is not a man who can make me smile, As you said today, our hearts are true as steel. I am not pretty. I know there are girls with shapely bodies, but I am not caring what they have. I have the greatest of all blessings, a noble man's deep, true, and noble love, and my heart is his. My life is his. All I have is his. Poor as my body is, great as my sin may be, I am his forever.
Well, those are some interesting love letters.
Yeah, one of the things that I took out of it was she was kind of putting herself down a little bit.
Sure.
About her physical appearance, her body, this and that. But I don't think there's any doubt, Gibbs, when you read that, even though the language is much different than what people would use today, you could pretty easily tell that these two people were in love. James Mills was questioned on the 16th and presented what was called by many papers as a perfect alibi for the evening of the 14th. He said he was walking home in the late afternoon. He met Eleanor at home and asked where she was going. She joked, "Follow me and find out." Something, I guess, that she often did. He went inside, which was later verified by his children, 12-year-old Daniel and 15-year-old Charlotte, and also by Mr. and Mrs. Kelly, who lived downstairs in the Mills house. At 2 a.m. on the 15th, he got up and went to look for Eleanor in her room. He couldn't find her, so he got dressed and he went to the church. He woke up his kids at this time. When he couldn't find Eleanor at church, he came home and went to bed.
So his wife doesn't come home. He heads out to see if she's at the church. She's not there. And he comes home and goes to bed. He calls it a night right there. He doesn't do anything further. He's satisfied that she is not at the church, but doesn't have any other concerns.
So it makes sense to me that he would go to the church. We mentioned it, right? She went to church every day. Now it is 2:00 in the morning,
right?
Which seems like a strange time to think that she would be at church. But, to your point, okay, go to church. She's not there. Come home. And that's the end of it. No, well, maybe I should check somewhere else. I think some people might look at that and say, that's your wife. She doesn't come home. You're going to go to one place and then give up. Okay, questionable. James Mills identified Eleanor's handwriting in the letters found at the crime scene. He said he didn't think Eleanor was on what he called intimate terms with Edward Hall. He told reporters that the letters were not written to Edward Hall. They were written to Dan and Charlotte, her kids. That one I have a hard time buying.
Same here.
Now, I get it. Our hearts are true as steel. We're deeply in, I don't know. The way she talked about her body and other women's bodies and my heart is his, that leans towards Edward Hall. Because if it's to the kids, it can only be to Daniel. He's 12 years old, and then it becomes creepy.
Exactly.
In my eyes.
Well, my eyes too.
Now, I understand the husband's trying to possibly deflect. He doesn't want maybe himself to believe, maybe even more importantly, for reporters to latch on to this being a love letter to another man.
Yeah.
But I think when, you look through the words that were in these letters, it's a hard argument to make that these were written to her young daughter and son.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. The police learned that Eleanor received a phone message at Henry Bornheimer's grocery store on the evening of the 14th. Someone sent for her at home, and she went to the store to answer the message. She went home, changed clothes, and went out again. This is when the police think that James met Eleanor and asked her where she was going. Francis Hall told the police that it was unusual for Edward to stay out late without calling. She went out from Thursday evening to 2 a.m. Friday because she said she was at church looking for Edward. Her brother Willie was with her. Francis Hall told the police she was home at the time of the murders, and a maid supported her alibi.
So both of the spouses of the murdered victims went out to check at the church for their spouses around or about 2 a.m. So they both had the same idea. Maybe they're at the church. Let me go check out and see if they're there.
Yeah, but the two had some differing statements. Like you mentioned it, they were reportedly at the church at the same time, but apparently they didn't see each other. James said that he turned the lights on, but Francis said that the church was dark. So either there's a discrepancy there or it's a timing issue.
Right.
One or the other. True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Let's face it, sometimes multitasking can be overwhelming. Like when your favorite podcast is playing and the person next to you is talking and your car fan is blasting, all while you're trying to find the perfect parking spot. But then again, sometimes multitasking is easy, like quoting with Progressive Insurance. They do the hard work of comparing rates so you can find a great rate that works for you, even if it's not with them. Give their nifty comparison tool a try, and you might just find getting the rate and coverage you deserve is easy. All you need to do is visit Progressive's website to get a quote with all the coverages you want, like comprehensive and collision coverage or personal injury protection. Then you'll see Progressive's direct rate, and their tool will provide options from other companies all lined up and ready to compare. So it's simple to choose the rate and coverages you like. Press play on comparing auto rates. Quote at progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Comparison rates not available in all states or situations. Prices vary on how you buy.
How much is your time worth? Whether you're a realtor, lawyer, accountant, or even a content creator, Stamps.com gives you the chance to focus your time on what you do best. Don't waste your time mailing letters or shipping packages. Stamps is there to help. Print stamps, shipping labels, or certified mail forms in seconds. Get up to 89% off USPS, UPS, and other carriers, and schedule free package pickups all from one place. Stamps.com also makes it easy to track shipments, manage contacts, and report on how much you send and spend. Over the last 28 years, more than 4 million customers have relied on Stamps.com to make their lives easier. Don't waste time worrying about being a postage expert or standing in line to drop off letters and packages. Let Stamps.com do what they do best so you can do what you do better. Go to Stamps.com/audio to sign up for a special offer. No contract, cancel anytime. That's Stamps.com/audio.
The police were working on a couple of theories. One was that Edward and Eleanor were killed for revenge. The other was that it was a robbery that ended up with them dead. Now, there was no money or jewelry found at the scene. Police also believed that it was possible that they were killed at another location and then placed in that field. Frances Hall and her brothers were suspects, but there was never enough evidence for a conviction. And I get why she would be a suspect, right? Probably based on the fact that, a witness or witnesses heard another woman, two women speaking, and then a woman screaming. And then I think police would have to put her brothers in there because it was, one of her brothers that gave her part of her alibi.
Yeah, we know that she said Willie went with her to the church that evening.
But then for her alibi not to be valid, that means that the maid would have had to have lied as well. There were rumors that Willie was angry with Edward over his allowance. Townspeople believed Willie was a little off. It was said that Willie spent most of his time at the local firehouse because he was fascinated by the equipment. He also spent a lot of time with children. Willie spent the day of September 18th roaming around town and sneaking up on groups of reporters. At one point, he randomly yelled out, "There's only one gun anywhere. That's my gun. I've got the only gun in either the Mills or the Hall family. It's a .38. It's in my desk at the house. It's a good gun."
Okay.
Yeah, this is very strange to be saying this after your brother-in-law has been found murdered and another woman found murdered as well, both shot. and you're running around saying you've got the only gun in the family. Okay. Maybe I get why some of the people in town thought he was a little bit off.
Yeah.
This is strange behavior.
Clearly, he liked to talk a lot.
According to the Amboy Evening News, at another point, he whispered to a female reporter, "I'm looking for a doctor who is responsible for the scandalous stories about my sister. If I find him, I'll settle with him in my own way. I can't say any more." Okay, a little cryptic. The Amboy Evening News reported that Francis Hall said to a friend on Sunday the 17th, "My husband was the victim of a terrible mistake. The murderer sought vengeance upon Mrs. Mills, and my husband's death was only incidental thereto." So here again, Gibbs, I mean, this is something that I get. Just as Eleanor's husband is trying to, kind of say she wasn't having an affair, this and that, it seems to me Francis is trying to do something similar.
Well, I think Francis is saying, look, he was just at the wrong place at the wrong time. He was only shot once versus Eleanor, who was shot several times and had her throat slashed.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to say of the two victims, Eleanor's wounds were much more brutal. So because of that, a person could make the case that she was the intended target of someone's rage and that Edward was only killed because he was there with her. Now, you could also make the case that if it was one of the spouses, there's still more rage against Eleanor, but they were there to kill both of them.
Yeah.
Detectives conducted an official search of the Phillips farm on September 18th. They found skid marks on the road 300 feet from the bodies that showed a car driving fast and braking suddenly. But they didn't really find much else. At the end of the search, a detective carried an item wrapped in paper into his office, believed to be a revolver. But police didn't tell the press what this item was. Charlotte Mills arranged her mother's funeral because she said her mother was her friend and she wanted to have an expensive funeral for her. Frances, Willie, and her second brother, Harry Stevens, attended Edward Hall's funeral on the afternoon of the 18th and returned to their homes. Willie Stevens was questioned on the evening of the 18th into the early morning hours of the 19th. According to the Amboy Evening News, on September 18th, Francis Hall wrote a letter to Charlotte that read, "Dear Charlotte, don't worry, everything will be all right. You will be looked out for. Sincerely, Mrs. H." Charlotte couldn't explain this note to the press, but she did say they'll never get the person who did it. They're going after the wrong people.
So we have Frances, the widow of Edward, reaching out to Eleanor's daughter, Charlotte, who's 15, telling her, don't worry, everything's going to be okay. Almost like, I'm going to help take care of you somehow.
Well, she did say you'll be looked out for.
Yeah.
Okay. She still has her dad. So what does that mean? The letter's a little strange.
It is strange. You could almost say, would that be a letter that somebody would write if they had a little bit of guilt?
You could look at it that way. But then you have Charlotte coming out and saying, basically, she didn't believe that Francis had anything to do with the murders because she said they're never going to get the person who did it. They're going after the wrong people. Detectives called in both families for questioning on the 19th. No arrests were made. The police thought Edward and Eleanor were killed at an abandoned farmhouse and then driven to where their bodies was found, and the murderer was a man who was jealous about the affair. But since James had been eliminated as a suspect, police wondered who else could be involved. When Edward was going to visit Eleanor, he often said that he was going to visit the Parker home for the aged and that Eleanor accompanied him to sing. I think the problem with this is that police interviewed the secretary, who could not recall Eleanor ever visiting. And then on top of that, the farmhouse where police believed these two were murdered was just across the road from this nursing home.
So maybe this was their meeting place.
And I think that's what police thought. They did find magazines and a library stocked with books. There was a couch, an ashtray with 2 cigarette butts, mattresses on some of the beds, a connected phone, and no dust. Written on a notepad by the phone was the name Willie Stevens. There were no signs of a struggle found inside the home, but you could see why they would think something was going on here, right? They called it an abandoned farmhouse, yet there's no dust. The phone's connected.
Right.
We've got some mattresses on the bed, so not too hard to probably put it together that this might have been a rendezvous type spot.
Yeah. And on top of that, you got Francis's brother Willie's name written on a notepad.
The press revealed that the abandoned farmhouse on the Phillips farm was sold to Joseph H. Porter in 1922. Porter was a trust officer of the National Bank of New Jersey and trustee of Willie's estate. The Phillips sold the house through Sam Levine, a real estate agent whose office was in the National Bank. In November 1921, he began negotiations with Porter. The house wasn't closed on until July 1922, with the agreement that the house be left as is, except for furniture. However, Mrs. Porter told the press that her husband no longer owned the house, and Samuel Levine claimed to be the owner. He planned to divide up the Phillips farm and sell the land in smaller lots. The police learned that Edward and Eleanor made frequent trips to New York together and began searching for what they called their love nest in the city. Edward had received $10,000 from his mother-in-law's estate. Police believed that they were going to use that money to run away together and elope.
It's a lot of money back in 1922.
That's a boatload of money. That will definitely set you up. Mrs. Molly Opal, the Mills' next-door neighbor, spoke to the police about what she knew about the affair. She heard Eleanor and James fighting about Eleanor's interest in Edward because Edward visited the house almost every day. She said Eleanor wanted to go on a retreat to get away from things. Now, she also said that they hadn't fought recently, but they often argued in the months before the murders. Whenever James would raise his voice, Eleanor would apparently sing to drown him out.
That's one way to try to stop an argument.
To try to diffuse the situation?
Yeah, or make the other party more upset.
I was going to say, I think for a lot of people that would just inflame the situation. Opal said she witnessed an argument between the two around March. She said Eleanor came back from church and James said to her, "You do more for that church and for Reverend Mr. Hall than you do for me." She said Eleanor responded with, "I care more for Mr. Hall's little finger than I do for your whole body."
Wow.
Not something that a husband wants to hear.
No.
And I think Gibbs, if I'm the police and I hear these statements made by the next door neighbor, okay, got to start thinking maybe the husband had a real reason to want his wife and the Reverend dead.
Yeah, definitely some motive there.
Opal said that Edward Hall called the house and visited a few times a day. He always parked across the street. She told the prosecutor that on the day of the murder, he called her house phone at 3 p.m. She recognized his voice because he called her house phone 3 to 4 times a week. He asked if she would call Eleanor. She called Eleanor, but didn't receive an answer. At 7:30 p.m., she met Eleanor on the street. She told her about the phone call and said if she wanted to use the phone, she could come over, but Eleanor never did. James and Charlotte Mills were questioned again after Molly Opal came forward. James Mills denied ever fighting with Eleanor about Edward Hall. During Eleanor's autopsy, it was noted that she was shot 3 times in the head, and specifically in the center of her forehead, the right cheek, and her right temple, just above her ear. There was a wound on her upper lip and a few cuts on her left arm. Her throat was cut in what was called a necklace incision. And I'm taking that to mean like left to right, as a necklace would hang. Her jugular vein, carotid artery, windpipe, and esophagus were severed. Investigators didn't see powder marks during the autopsy, but it was said that they may have disappeared during the period between the murder and when the autopsy was performed.
How vicious was that attack, knowing how deep that cut on her throat was?
Well, to sever all of that stuff, the jugular, the carotid, her windpipe, her esophagus. And this is in addition to, being shot 3 times. This is a very brutal murder.
Yeah.
And I think you have to ask yourself, right? Why so brutal when Edward was shot once in the head? What does that mean? Does it mean that somebody was much more upset with Eleanor and needed to release anger, and so her murder was much more vicious? On October 11th, 1922, 19-year-old Clifford Hayes was arrested for the murders. Hayes's friend, Raymond Schneider, who was 21 years old, confessed that Hayes shot Eleanor and Edward because he thought they were 15-year-old Pearl Balmer, Raymond's girlfriend, and her stepfather. Schneider said that Hayes had also dated Pearl in the past. They both suspected Pearl's father was assaulting her and wanted to kill him. Raymond Schneider was arrested as a material witness. Hayes' attorney said he had proof that Hayes was home when the murder occurred. Hayes said he got home at 12:45 a.m. on the 15th and went to bed, and this was confirmed by his family. Charlotte Mills declared that she thought Hayes was innocent. According to the Amboy Evening News, Schneider signed a statement that he and Hayes left the theater at 10:35 p.m. and followed Pearl and her stepfather until they lost track of them. They continued walking until they came upon a woman and a man at 1:30 a.m. Hayes said, "There they are," and fired 3 or 4 shots. Schneider said he knew that Hayes had made a mistake when he shot the couple. He said Hayes pulled a scarf over the woman's face. And then the next day, Schneider and Pearl Balmer went out looking for mushrooms and came across the bodies. Schneider called the police and told them what he knew, but both Hayes and Schneider denied going to the Phillips farm. Pearl and Nicholas Balmer were also arrested. Pearl told the police that her father had threatened to cut her throat more than once, and nobody knows what might have happened if he came upon a couple when he was drunk and looking for Schneider. Pearl's father hated Schneider because they were dating. So I do think, this is interesting, Gibbs, from the standpoint that Schneider was there when the bodies were found. So either he and Pearl accidentally stumbled across these bodies. We said he called the police, or he knew exactly where these bodies were because he was there when they were murdered.
Yeah. I'm just thinking how busy of a night the 14th was.
And the one thing that kind of struck me was that you got a lot of people out very, very late.
Yeah.
I would have thought in 1922, I guess for some reason, I don't know why, people would have been in bed a little earlier. Maybe not. Maybe everybody was a night owl. But everybody involved in this story was a night owl. They were out at 12, 1, 2.
Just wandering around.
Pearl said that on the night of the 14th, she was out walking with Schneider, Hayes, and a man named Leo Kaufman. Her stepfather took her to the woods near the Phillips farm and attempted to assault her, but she fought him off. Her father took her home at 10 p.m., then left the house. She said he was angry and drunk. Pearl's father denied knowing Schneider and said he had no reason to be jealous of anyone dating his daughter. According to him, he and Pearl were walking in the park when they were followed by a couple of men. He asked them what they wanted, and they said they were looking for a place to lie down. They walked away and went home. So again, Gibbs, just like you said, there is a lot of people out walking around, people bumping into each other.
Hey, man, I just need a place to lay down.
Clifford Hayes was released on the 12th after Schneider swore that he made a false statement. Basically, Schneider said he collapsed under the strain of questioning. In December 1922, Raymond Schneider was sentenced to 2 years in a reformatory for perjury. According to the Courier News, on October 24th, the press revealed that Florence North, Charlotte Mills' attorney, was threatened by the KKK for her investigation. She had proposed that the murders may have been committed by a committee of outraged citizens, but her investigation had shifted to the jealous woman theory. She received a letter that said, "If you do not stop exploiting your foolish ideas, the KKK will give you a taste of the same medicine we gave to Mrs. Mills. So beware, or you will see the fiery cross some night and get your due reward." So I would think, Gibbs, if that's true, that would be a very scary letter to receive. According to the Courier News, on October 24th, a woman named Jane Gibson came forward as an eyewitness. Gibson was a pig farmer, which would earn her the sensational nickname Pig Woman.
Pig Woman. There's a name you want to be known as.
Well, I don't think most women would want to be called Pig Woman, but Jane was after a corn thief that night. She believed that they might have been at the Phillips farm at 9 p.m. on the 14th. She hitched up her mule and went to the farmhouse. She stumbled upon the crime scene. While she was looking for stolen property, she saw 2 men and 2 women standing under a crabapple tree having a heated argument. She later identified them as Francis Hall, Willie Stevens, Edward Hall, and Eleanor Mills. She said a man pulled out a pistol and fired. And then Eleanor let out a horrible shriek and called the man by his name. But the man's name wasn't written in the Courier News article. The man who was shot did not say anything. Jane said she was afraid, and she quickly left. When Jane returned to look for a missing moccasin, she saw Francis Hall kneeling over a body. When reporters came to Jane's house to get a statement, she threatened to shoot them and denied seeing or hearing anything. She said, "There isn't the slightest bit of truth in that story, except that I do ride a mule."
Well, if it is a true story, here's another person out late at night.
Well, if it's a true story, then it also means for some reason she later became scared.
Yes.
And decided that, no, I don't really want to stick to this story. Now, you could also make the argument that she didn't say any of this. But then you have to ask the question, well, how did it end up in the paper?
Well, you know, Francis Hall had a lot of money. And back then, money definitely gave you a lot of power.
You mean as opposed to now?
Yeah.
Because I'm pretty sure a lot of money now still gives you a lot of power.
It does, but I think it wielded a lot more power back then.
I agree with you. Obviously, if you want to go down the conspiracy theory road, you can make an argument that that money bought Jane's silence. Mrs. Hall agreed to her first interview on November 1st, and she said that she didn't believe her husband was unfaithful and thought that the published letters were fake. Again, Gibbs, none of these people want to believe that their spouses were being unfaithful.
Or they just don't want the public to believe it.
Well, that could be. They could know in their heart that their spouses were being unfaithful, but they don't want to look bad in the eyes of the public, maybe.
Yeah, reputation.
In November 1922, a Somerset County grand jury failed to indict Francis Hall and her brothers. The grand jury heard testimony from Francis, Willie Stevens, and 50 witnesses, including Jane Gibson, but did not file any charges against any of them. In February of the next year, Frances Hall went to Europe and stayed away for more than a year. And I think some people would look at that and say one of two things. One, she wanted to get away.
Right.
From all of this circus and everything that was going on. Or the flip side is that she'd gotten away with something and wanted to lay low. Paul Hamborski, a minister friend of Edward Hall, told a newspaper that Hall confided in him that Frances knew about the affair and that one of her relatives threatened to kill him unless he stopped seeing Eleanor. Hall told Hamborski they were going to run away together. So that's interesting, Gibbs, in that you have a minister saying this to a paper. Not that a minister couldn't possibly lie, but I think we put a lot more faith in them to, kind of tell the truth. But I think the most interesting aspect of it was that Hamborski later vanished in early 1926.
Yeah. He makes his statement, then he's gone.
According to the Hall Mills murder case, the most fascinating unsolved homicide in America, this is a paper written for Rutgers Library by Dr. Mary Hartman. The Stevenses went to trial in late 1926 when the husband of one of their maids swore that his wife was paid $5,000 to conceal information. On July 15th of that year, the case reopened with a new inquiry. Arthur Reel filed an annulment petition against Louise Geist, his wife and former maid of the Hall household. He swore in an affidavit that his wife accepted $5,000 to keep information secret. According to Reel, Louise was friends with Edward Hall and called him my old buddy. In 1922, the Halls were having marital difficulties. She carried messages between them. Mr. Hall hosted friends at the house at the Phillips farm. On September 14th, Hall left home with a large sum of cash and told her to tell Mrs. Hall that he would be gone a couple of days. She knew he was planning to elope with Eleanor. At 10 or 11 p.m., Mrs. Hall and Willie Stevens were driven to the farm by a man named Peter Tumulty, the chauffeur. Louise received $5,000 for keeping quiet about everything, and certain county officials were always taken care of for preventing anyone from breaking the case. So, again, if this is true, it really goes back to your statement of money, power, and the ability to cover things up.
Sure.
$5,000 in 1922 is a lot of money.
It was probably more than her salary as a maid.
Oh, I would say it was probably many, many years' salary. I don't know for sure, but it was a lot of money.
Yeah.
And let's not forget, we said early on that the maid was Frances's alibi.
Yeah.
On July 28th, 1926, Frances Hall was arrested. She was woken up from bed. She got dressed and asked to see the warrants. After reading the warrant, she asked to call an attorney. She waited at home with the police until her attorney arrived. She was held without bail and accused of murder. She called her arrest ridiculous, but wouldn't say anything else. Days later, Frances was released on $15,000 bail. Then on August 12th, Willie Stevens and a cousin named Henry Carpenter were arrested. Henry Stevens, Frances's brother, was arrested on September 16th. Also arrested was William Phillips, a night watchman. He was arrested as a material witness. Sunday school teacher Minnie Clark was charged as an accessory. Frances's private investigator, Felix Martini, was charged as an accessory, but New Jersey prosecutors couldn't get him extradited from New York. In September, Frances Hall, her brothers, and her cousin Henry were all indicted for murder. And the trial started on November 3rd, 1926. So, again, a lot of people arrested. accused, charged with murder, charged with being an accessory to murder. But I do think, the one thing that is striking is that everything seems to go back to Frances Hall and her brothers and extended family. Obviously, these were the people that police had been focusing on for years.
Right. But always had some type of roadblock in front of them.
Or never had enough.
Right.
And it was Jane Gibson, the woman that, papers kept calling Pig Woman, who was the prosecution's star witness. Apparently, Gibbs, she was wheeled in on her hospital bed to testify because she was sick. She had cancer.
And you can see in some of the old photos, she's actually in her white hospital bed with a white gown on, laying down in her bed, right there in the middle of the court. Testifying.
Well, and it was said that each time Jane told her story, it became more and more sensational. For example, her diary said she heard a farmer fire 4 shots on September 14th, but she testified that she rode her mule towards the Lover's Lane and saw the killers. Jane testified that she saw Willie Stevens at the crime scene and said she had identified Frances Hall back in 1922. Jane's own mother screamed out from the crowd in court, "She's a liar."
Yeah, her own mom went against her.
The prosecution presented a witness who said he was in the Lover's Lane with a woman that night and heard gunshots at 10:15 p.m. He claimed he saw Henry Stevens, who told him to get out and later made him swear he would tell no one. A private investigator came forward to say that this man came to his office to tell him what happened. Other witnesses, though, identified this man as part of a network of spies, including Minnie Clark, the Sunday school teacher. Minnie allegedly kept Mrs. Hall informed about everything going on between Eleanor and Edward and even read some of their letters. Other witnesses said that Frances's private investigator bribed them to stay quiet. A hearse driver testified that on the day of the funeral, Mrs. Hall was wearing a veil, but he could see scratches on her cheek.
As if she was in a struggle.
Well, at the very least, you would want her to explain or try to explain where those scratches came from.
Yeah.
The trial ended on December 4th, 1926. Frances, Willie, and Henry Stevens were acquitted of murder. Everyone was released from custody and the charges were dropped. Henry Carpenter was going to have a separate trial, but his charges were dropped after the acquittal. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle reported that Frances' defense counsel released a statement that read, "My brothers and I are very glad, after 4 years of gossip and false accusations, to have had this opportunity to face the situation in open court, to have personally gone on the witness stand and submitted ourselves to thorough cross-examination and to have obtained complete vindication through the verdict of a Somerset County jury."
So the prosecution has to feel pretty defeated.
Yeah, I would say so. They basically got nothing that they were going after, not a single person. Henry Carpenter died in 1934. Henry Stevens died in 1939. Frances Stevens Hall died in 1942, as did her brother Willie. Charlotte Mills died in 1952, and James Mills died in 1965. So, obviously this case is very old. You're going to have, over the years, kind of all of the players eventually die, and it kind of seemed like the case was going to die with them. But in 1969, 67-year-old Julius Boliag, a Hungarian immigrant, came forward with information. He claimed he knew Willie Stevens. WINS, a New York City radio station, broadcast his story over 8 segments in 1969. The New Brunswick Free Public Library later published the broadcasts online. Julius told the police that he gave $6,000 given to him by Francis Hall to what he called two local hoodlums around the time of the murders. He said he did it as a favor to Willie Stevens. Julius claimed that this all happened after the murders, but before the bodies were found. Willie Stevens approached him outside a store. He asked where he had come from. Willie said he was seeing Ike and he wanted Julius to come with him. He asked Willie what happened because he seemed nervous, and Willie said he needed his help badly. Willie led him 2 blocks away and pointed out a car where Francis and a man were sitting. Julius approached Mrs. Hall because Willie told him to. Francis told the man in the car, "I guess it's all right. Give it to him." And he gave Julius 2 envelopes. Julius took the envelopes to Willie. Willie told him to go see Ike. Ike took both envelopes and gave one to a guy named Freddie. Then Freddie told Julius that he needed to keep his mouth shut if he knew what was good for him. One of the men was identified as Isidore Gutman, or Ike Gutman. In 1934, he was murdered by a mafia member. Freddie, the other man, has never been identified. So Gibbs, Julius kept quiet on this stuff for 47 years. And he said he didn't want to talk because he thought he'd be killed. In 1968, Julius was in the hospital with a heart condition. A nurse told him that Mr. Mills died 2 years ago in the same hospital. He told her he felt like he needed to confess what he knew. He was worried that he wasn't going to make it, so he wanted to come forward with what he knew. The police took his statement and began investigating on September 30th, 1968. But according to the news program, racial trouble at New Brunswick High School caused the investigation to be pushed aside. Then on March 30th, 1969, a detective found the report and reopened the investigation. Julius Boliog took 2 polygraphs and reportedly passed them both. And it was said, Gibbs, that he received a perfect score during the second, more thorough exam.
So it sounds like everything he said, he was telling the truth.
Or at the very least, he believed he was telling the truth. A reporter named Reginald Kavanaugh followed the investigation and corroborated parts of Julius's story. And apparently the information he corroborated was never published in the papers because it just wasn't that interesting or it didn't really have any meaning at the time. Now, investigators never confirmed if the money was payment for a service or, money to keep quiet. A detective working the case said that he thought it was a fee for a crime committed, but that was just his speculation. Unfortunately, Boliog's confession never led to an arrest or a conviction. And Gibbs, really the last person close to this case, Daniel Mills, who was 12 years old?
Right.
At the time of the murders, died in October of 1992. So as we wrap up this case, in September of this year, the case will turn 100 years old. Obviously, it's pretty unlikely that anyone involved with this case is still alive. My assumption is Daniel was the last one. So there's really little hope that anyone would ever be able to come forward and say what truly happened on the night of September 14th, 1922. The case does remain open, but you'd have to say the likelihood that it will ever be solved is pretty low.
Yeah.
100 years is a long time. When nobody is alive that had any connection to the case, well, who's going to come forward? I think, if you want to put on the detective hat, the Sherlock Holmes hat, and kind of break down this case, I don't think there's any doubt that, at least on the part of the police, they believed that Frances and her brothers and maybe a cousin were involved in the murder.
Right.
There's no doubt about that. They tried them once. They arrested them, questioned them multiple times. They never got a conviction against anyone. But there is a lot of circumstantial evidence, circumstantial facts in this case that we talked about that, if true, kind of point towards Frances using her money to either silence people or get them to give her an alibi, get them to say what she wanted them to say. Back to your point, she had the money.
Sure did.
To influence people to do what she wanted them to do. Now, does that mean that she had a hand in murdering Edward and Eleanor? There's no way to conclusively say that, but there's no doubt that she was very high on the list of suspects, probably at the very top when it came to the police. I think in large part because of the witness statements, them saying they heard two women talking. Now, again, are those witness statements correct? This was a story where there were a lot of things said and a lot of things retracted or walked back.
Right.
So what do you believe? But I think that's why, a lot of people like these types of stories. Okay, put on your detective hat, go through the facts or at least the known reporting of what happened.
Right.
Decide for yourself.
I think at the end of the day, you have to look at how Eleanor was killed versus how Edward was killed. Vicious attack on Eleanor.
But what does that tell us? That somebody held a great deal of rage, more rage against Eleanor than they did Edward. But there's other people that could have held that rage.
Sure.
Her husband being one of them.
Yeah.
If he thought she was having an affair, if he knew she was having an affair, he would be very angry with her. Obviously, Frances would be very angry with her if she knew that she was sleeping with her husband.
Yeah.
So you have a couple of people there that really had a motive to want to see both of them dead. But that's it for our case on the Hall Mills murders. We got some voicemails, Gibbs. You want to check those out?
Yeah, let's hear them.
Hello. My name is Alexandra. I'm calling from Sweden, which kind of a little odd. I only heard American or English people call you, but I just wanted to tell you that your podcast is amazing. And just keep on doing it because I love it. I really listen to episodes a lot. And also, this is kind of odd, maybe, but I have had a little trouble with my English in my school. But your podcast actually helped me, which kind of, maybe it's a little weird, but I now have B in English. Before I didn't have much, but you guys really helped me. I just want to tell you that I don't want to leave like a too long message, but I have a little hard with English words, and thank you. Bye.
So I got a real kick out of that voicemail. First of all, her English was really good. Second of all, be careful patterning your English after us.
Well,
that might get you in trouble sometimes.
Maybe.
Although Gibby is a wordsmith.
I am.
So, if you want to pattern yourself after him, you'll probably be okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. I am just wanting to give a shout out to my amazing, beautiful daughter who is graduating high school, who has, by the time this is played, has graduated high school. She is the baby of the family, so I am done with high school and stuff for the kids. So congratulations to her. I know it was a struggle, but she did amazing and graduated with cords. So I am proud of her. And by the time she hears this, it'll be too late, and I have now embarrassed her. So have a great day. Thank you, guys. Thanks for being part of everything we do. Talk to you later. Bye.
Well, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
I don't think it will embarrass her too much because she didn't say her name. So
true.
We don't know who you are.
Yeah, but congratulations.
But congratulations anyway. Next year, Gibbs, is going to be a big year for me because my oldest will be graduating college.
Yeah.
And my youngest will be graduating high school.
Oh, man. That means I got to get my wallet out.
You're going to have to pry open the wallet.
Yeah.
Give my kids a little something.
Something.
Hey, Mike and Gibby. This is Mikey K from Wisconsin. I discovered your podcast probably about 2.5 months ago and started on Unsolved. Absolutely loved it. Finishing up Unsolved now, and then I'm going to go back and restart TCAT. I just want to say I work from home, and you guys make it so much easier to deal with working and other things going on. I love your guys' banter. I just signed up on Patreon, and I just wanted to thank you guys. I hope you have a great day and keep your own time ticking.
Wow, it's a great voicemail. You know, we appreciate everyone listening. We obviously appreciate you making the decision to sign up for Patreon.
Yeah.
That means a lot to us.
It does.
So thank you. All right, buddy. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.